All right, welcome to our channel. We are going to be talking about the Everton points deduction. I'm just popping the link here on Twitter so people can follow along. All right, let's get started. All right, so the big news of the day today is Everton receiving a 10-point deduction due to financial fair play violations, and these stem from a couple years ago, and there are so many points here. This is going to have just such lasting ramifications across football, across England, across everything. I mean, there's a lot of dominoes that are going to fall from this, and we don't even know what they all are yet. But there's a couple key points I want to talk about. Before we do, if you don't already follow the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. Follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. So the first thing is, if your response to this, now if you're an Everton fan, obviously this is trouble, and you have the right to feel however you want. But if you're a neutral of some kind, or you're a fan of another club, if your response to this is, man, Everton's getting a 10-point deduction, but Manchester City has 115, 117 charges out there, they have the league is corrupt, you are just showing your ass, right? You are either uneducated about what's happening here in these charges, or you're just being a bitter fan. And this is not just coming from my place as a Manchester City supporter, because if you're also running and throwing Chelsea into that mix or Newcastle into that mix, you're equally as ill-informed. If you are equating this to any of the massive spending by clubs with some sort of state-owned affiliation, and by the way, Manchester City, not technically state-owned. Look that up sometime. That's for a different time. But if you're lumping Newcastle and Chelsea and Manchester City all into this, you are not understanding what is happening. So that's what we're going to talk about first. Everton is being charged here because, very simply, they spent too much money. They spent way more than they made, and you're not allowed to do that. That is the violation at its simplest. That's why there's one charge here, not 117. What you have to really understand about the massive swath of Manchester City charges is that they're all for basically the same thing, and it's not, believe it or not, it's not for spending too much money. That's what this charge is for Everton. The financial fair play at its core does not allow you to spend and to operate at too much of a loss. It regulates how much of a loss you can operate at, because too many clubs were operating at a massive loss just in an attempt to get promoted or to stay in the Premier League, and then they were ending up in bankruptcy, or as they call it in England, in administration, being placed in administration. And that's not good, because the clubs would fold and people would lose jobs, and it's a mess. And so these regulations are there to prevent teams from doing that. And Everton did it. They operated at, I don't have it in front of me, but like a £120 million loss a couple of years ago, and now they're being punished for it. So it's really quite simple. You can't do that. They did it. Now, I'm going to get into in a little bit the question of, did they know they had crossed whatever the threshold is? What is the threshold? Where's the transparency? I have some massive, massive issues there. So this is not me saying, Everton, you got what you deserved. That's not what I'm saying here. If anything, it's wildly confusing, and that's part of the problem. But what happened there is very simple, and what happened with Manchester City, for example, is not simple. Manchester City's charges are surrounding how they reported, and whether or not they were forthcoming with their reports, and if they were honest, if their reports were honest. It's not saying, Manchester City, you spent and operated at a loss. In fact, they're operating at massive profits, as we saw recently. There are questions about whether those profits are legitimate, or in the case of Manchester City and of Newcastle, it's we got this massive sponsorship deal, right? Well, you got it from Newcastle, the Saudi Arabian Airlines, and you're owned by the government of Saudi Arabia, so it's a little fishy. But technically, that's within the rules. Should it be? That's a different question. I would say no. But at the moment, it is. Right? So that in and of itself is not a violation. Manchester City's charges are for not reporting properly, for potentially lying, essentially. And if those are true, then they do deserve to be punished. I'm not going to sit here and go, they're right and Everton was wrong. If the league can prove that is true, then they deserve whatever punishment is coming. And if this is 10 points and they had all these other violations, God knows what it could be. So that is hanging out there, but this is apples and oranges, right? These Manchester City charges, that have been sitting there for a long time, and the league can't seem to prove, which makes you question the validity of them. But they're out there, but they have nothing to do with this. This is just straight up, you spent more than you're allowed, right? Which gets into my next question, which is, how does this happen? Is this gross incompetence on Everton's part, where they're legitimately saying, "Oh, we didn't know we spent too much," right? I don't know, and I'm not privy to, but I have not seen any reports on what you are allowed to spend, and it's because it varies from team to team. This is not a salary cap. You can spend X. It's not like the NFL or the NBA where you can spend X and you can't go over. This is based on how much money you make. So how this sort of thing happens generally is you spend a bunch of money for players, transfer fees, getting players in, and you assume you are going to make a certain amount of money. Ticket sales, jersey sales, corporate sponsorships, everything. And then something happens and you don't. And you go, oh shit, we're not going to make enough. Now we spent way too much, right? And so that's the problem, and that's how this sort of thing happens. Now, how you get that close to it and even put yourself in a position where you could possibly go over it if something goes wrong is beyond me, right? If I'm running this business, I'm extra conservative with my budgeting so that there is no chance, right? Oh, we didn't sell out Goodison Park a couple times, so now we're gonna get a violation, right? You can't let it be that close. You just can't. And I don't know if that's how that went down, but there's definitely a level of incompetence there for this sort of thing to happen. Or is it brilliant, right? Are they playing 4D chess? I don't think Everton was, but if I'm Chelsea, right? I'm Chelsea and I see 10-point deduction for spending at a loss, for operating at a loss, for spending too much. Hey, Bowley, go get the checkbook, right? Because 10 points is nothing to Chelsea. Everton has a battle. And everyone is right now, everyone is real quick to jump on the Everton's going to be fine. This isn't even going to be a punishment. They're still not going to get relegated bandwagon. I'm not so sure. Now, Everton is better than Luton and Burnley and Sheffield, but this puts them back at the start. This is like, losing all your money and going to jail in Monopoly. Like this is tough. They've got some work to do here. And they're not that good that anybody should be really confident. If I'm an Everton fan right now, I'm shitting myself a little bit. So, this is a punishment for them, which is why I don't think anything here was done on purpose. But if I'm Chelsea, I'm like, screw it, right? 10 points isn't going to put them in the relegation zone at the end of the year. They're going to be fine. And they're not Manchester City or Liverpool or Arsenal, who's got a legitimate chance to win. Right? Because if Manchester City got a 10-point deduction, that's probably the difference between a title or not. So they wouldn't want to do this. But if you're a mid-table team, you're West Ham, you're Brighton, not that they would ever spend any money, but if you're Crystal Palace, right? If you're Wolves might be a little fringy. But if you're one of these mid-table teams where you're going to clear the relegation battle by, easy 10 points, probably more like 15 or 20, fuck it, right? Like, fuck it. Go spend. Go spend $1 billion if you have it, right? And Chelsea does. So they're sitting there like, oh wait, our potential punishment for this is 10 points? All right, I'll wear the 10 points. Let's go. And Bowley actually has a history of doing that. He did this with the Dodgers. In baseball, there's no points, so there's no way to do a points deduction. But you don't take away wins. Baseball has what they call a luxury tax, and so it's not a spending limit, but it says if you spend over this amount, every dollar here you really are you're gonna get fined like 50%. There's like 20% and 50%. There's different thresholds. So it's like once you spend a certain amount, now you're spending like $1.50 for every dollar. So that $20 million contract's really costing you $30 million, right? And Bowley and his ownership group of the Dodgers just went, screw it, we don't care. Right? Oh, that's good. Supposed to stop us? Well, let it stop everybody else. We're rich. We're richer than the other rich guys. We're spending it, right? And it worked. It worked. They got a championship out of it, and they've won, 7 or 8 division titles in a row, and it works, right? So I could see Bowley going, give me that 10 points. I don't care, right? Let's go spend another $1 billion. And so it does beg the question: is the punishment too strong? or is it not strong enough? And I think you could make an argument for both sides. You know, if the 10 points makes them, relegates Everton, you could argue that, man, they spent, 10, 20 million more than they were allowed to, and they're going to get relegated over it. God, that's rough, right? That's a rough penalty. But at the same time, if it's not enough of a deterrent, then why do it? What's the point of it, right? What's this little slap on the wrist, 10 points, if it doesn't hurt them? So, the one driving factor for any of these Premier League owners is the fear of relegation. And it makes owners make bad decisions, frankly. It leads to too many managerial firings and too quickly, for sure. And it leads to bad signings and desperation and all these terrible decisions that deviate from a long-term plan and result in short-term mismanagement. But it is the one driving force and the one driving fear. So if a violation does not carry the weight of relegation, then is it really accomplishing anything? I would argue no. So in that sense, maybe it should be more. But I think my issue here is the lack of transparency, right? Why 10 points? Where'd that come from? And if Chelsea does it, do they get 10 points or do they get more, right? Does their place in the table factor in here, right? Obviously the magnitude of violations would have to factor in, but how much? How much does it factor in? There's no transparency here from the judge and jury as to why this, why now, the time frame during which these are given out. It varies from case to case. You got to remember, this is only the third time a penalty has actually been handed down in a points deduction like this in the Football League's history for FFP violations. There are threats of it all the time. Chelsea's got one looming. Manchester City's got one looming. I think they're looking into Newcastle. There's always it's always sort of looming on the horizon for these big clubs that spend, but it rarely actually comes to fruition. And here it did. So, I do have an issue with the timing and the way it is distributed, the way these things are finally enforced. Is it fair to Sean Dyche and the current players that this is a penalty today, this year, for something that happened a couple of years ago? How's that fair? Going back to Chelsea, they're facing a massive points deduction for things Roman Abramovich did. He's not even the owner of the club anymore. You could make an argument that says, no, it's not fair to Sean Dyche and the current players, but hey, it's the same owner that's their club, so the punishment has to be doled out there. Chelsea, it's not even the same owner. Nobody's still the same, right? No one is still around from when these things happen. So how does that make any sense, right? How does it make any sense? And on the flip side, what would the alternative punishment be? I genuinely don't know. You already took the team from Roman, so I don't know what else you can do. But I don't love the way these things are doled out. If I'm an Everton fan, I'm a little bit upset at going, well, why now? Why now, and why 10, and why, for a couple of years ago, why now? But I'm not saying, well, what about Manchester City? Because it's apples and oranges. It doesn't make any sense. I will say, though, this might be, if they can get away with it, this is the ideal time for Everton, right? Because had it been done more quickly last year, relegated. If it didn't happen this year and they did get relegated, because even before this, they were, fringy on that. They had a couple wins to get them a few points clear, but no guarantee that was going to continue. Let's say they got relegated this year and then got the points deduction. What if that led to another relegation? I mean, they'd probably be okay in the championship, but they're going to lose a lot of talent. Then they're facing a points deduction. Dyche won't coach down there. He's going to be gone. The wheels could have really come off. So if it can be doled out now and they can still manage to survive relegation, it literally had no effect. It had no actual negative effect on them, assuming they can still avoid relegation. Now, I will contend that is a big if. I think people are giving them way too much credit for this and just assuming they're going to work their way back out. And maybe they will, but I don't think it's nearly the given that the football punditry world that I was listening to this morning seemed to think it was. I think they've got more of a battle in front of them than people are giving credit to. But nevertheless, if they can avoid the drop, this had no effect. had no effect whatsoever. It's going to be the difference between finishing 14th and 17th. Big freaking deal, right? Doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I think there's some financial implications there, but nothing major, right? So again, was it enough? Was it enough? Or is this just a scare tactic, right? And if you do it again, it'll be 15. You do it again, it'll be 20. I don't know. We don't get. There's this system in place. It's just, it would be nice if the FA or the governing bodies would say, if you do this, this is the punishment. If you cross this line, this is the punishment, right? You are allowed to operate at a loss. I don't know to what extent. How much of a loss? Is it 100 million? 120 million? Is it 10%? Right? Is it of your operating budget? Is it, from a business standpoint, I would be nice if the clubs knew. Maybe that's out there. I've researched it. I have not seen it. So if anybody has that information or has seen that information, please, leave it in the comments or hit me up on Twitter, DM me or something. I would love to know how much is too much of a loss, right? I think they said here it was like 120 million pounds. Yeah, that's a lot. But are they 10 million over? Are they 5 million over? Or were they 100 million over of the limit? Like, of how much of a loss you're allowed to operate at? Because you can operate at some loss, but not these massive systemic year after year losses. That's what FFP is regulating. I would love to know how much they cleared the threshold by, right? By how far did they violate this rule? That's my question. By how far did they violate the rule? Were they just a little bit over it, or did they just blow it out of the water, right? And if they just went over by a little, is that why it's 10 points? And if they went over by a lot, it would be 20, right? If they operated at a $200 million loss, would it have been a 20-point deduction? I would love to know the answer to these questions, and I feel like it's only fair to the clubs for this stuff to be defined ahead of time. And maybe internally they know these things. If the club operators are privy to that information and we're not, okay, fine. But if that's the case, then this is gross incompetence and negligence on the part of Everton to allow the club to get anywhere near that level of financial loss and have this threat possibly and end up with them being relegated. So if that's the case, that is gross incompetence and negligence. However, it might also be a strategy that bigger clubs like Chelsea could employ to basically just be able to spend what they want. So there are so many things happening here. Obviously it's going to be interesting to see if Everton can survive this. That's the immediate story, but my questions really are what implications this has for the future, for other clubs, for how they operate. Not what happens with Manchester City's charges, not if Chelsea gets charged, not if Newcastle gets charged. All of these things are different scenarios. They have nothing to do with this other than FFP. But they're not even the same parts of FFP, right? One is reporting, one is how you're making your money, and this one is just, you just straight up didn't make enough money, right? You just spent too much. So we're talking about apples and oranges. That shouldn't even be a part of the conversation. Stop being bitter. Stop being angry. Do some research. Whatever it is that's making you say that, just stop it. But I am interested to see if this changes how other clubs operate, if this is the deterrent that the governing bodies want it to be, or if this is just a little slap on the wrist that makes the club go, yeah, all right, give me the 10 points, I don't care. So that'll be really fascinating to watch. I would love to get your thoughts. If you haven't already, get in that comment section for me. This will be up on our channel for a while, so even if you're watching it after the fact, chime in on your thoughts. Whether you're a fan of Everton, fan of another club, whatever, I would love to get your thoughts on this. Of course, if you don't already, go follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. Follow the channel if you don't already, and stick around because we're going to do more videos on this. We're going to talk live. We're trying to do this more often, talk almost every day if we can, see how this works, see if we can't gain a little following doing this. So thanks as always for joining us here at Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.